A cold hand grabbed my arm.
Security guards were very happy that we were back because they actually saw the little girl.
There would be a person in the mirror staring back at me.
Someone's watching me, I feel it.
And there's a dark figure at the end of the lobby.
This is gonna be a really creepy night if this is Freddy.
Disneyland is haunted. I'm going to say that unapologetically and without hesitation. If you don't believe in ghosts, then okay, this isn't the video for you. This channel is normally about history. My paranormal experiences as a former cast member aren't fake, because I have no incentive for you to believe me. This video is a one and done deal. I have no more stories to tell. I was a Disneyland cast member from 2009 to 2016, and before that I used to be a lifelong Disneyland fan, visiting the park countless times each year since childhood. In 2020, I decided to record my experiences in detail, and that's the recording you're about to see and hear, along with some visuals to help illustrate the setting. Yes, my voice sounded different then, and the recording was not scripted, so I do say a lot. I tried to edit it out wherever I could. Now let's start off with the time before I ever worked for Disney, when I was a young teenager and my father worked for the Disneyland Hotel.
I'm completely doing this on the fly, but I did make some notes for myself so that way I remember some things that happened to me, so that way I don't leave anything out. Before I became a cast member, I remember being a young boy, and my father had worked for the Disneyland Resort in the hotels department. He used to assign me into Disneyland with my friends for the day, and then late at night after the park closed, I'd meet him at one of the hotels. Usually I preferred to meet him at Disneyland Hotel, so that way I could kind of sit and relax and wait for him to get off his shift, and then we would drive home together. So one night, I am waiting for him in the lobby of the Disneyland Hotel. Its lobby bathroom was downstairs, and that bathroom was haunted. I didn't know this at the time, but for instance, I went to the restroom in there one time, and I had heard someone enter the room, and I was thinking like, okay, well, as usual, you don't pay any attention to it because it's somebody else. But it was kind of odd because I was like, this is like 1 a.m, and there's no one in the lobby. Who would be coming down here to the restroom? But I didn't pay it much any mind. I even heard them using the urinals next to me and then going to wash their hands. And I had just finished doing my business. I came out of the stall and the sink was still running, but there was no one there. And I was like, that's really weird. Like, where did they go? And so I opened the door just to see who it was. Like, somebody left the sink running. Like, well, who does that? So I opened the door and I looked up the stairs. Nobody was there. And I thought that was really weird. And I didn't pay it much attention. And the next time I had used that bathroom, I think a couple weeks later, I had heard someone come into the bathroom and they were talking. And they were like they were like whispering, and I was like, what is that? And when I had finished doing my business, I once again walk out of the stall and there's no one there. It just the talking stopped.
This video was taken by LMG Vids and posted to his channel back in 2022. It was just a segment of his thorough walkthrough of the hotel. In his video, he went downstairs. You can see him pause, then reverse back up the stairs, explaining that he felt he was being watched. When I asked what had happened, he said that he felt an overwhelming sensation, like something was down there with him, watching him. He's not a ghost skeptic nor a believer, but he said that area gave him a strange feeling.
Someone's watching me, I feel it.
My dad told me, that bathroom is often reported by the guests. They say that they experience weird things, that there's someone there, but when they go to look, the person isn't there.
My name is Joe, and I am Alex's father. I worked at the Disneyland Hotel for 18 and a half years. There are many ghost stories, including some that I've witnessed, including the one with the restrooms in the Frontier Tower, but the most famous one would be The little girl that runs around on the 7th floor of the Frontier Tower, we called her or nicknamed her the Peppermint Girl because you would not only see her sometimes, but you would smell peppermint. And if you smelled peppermint, then that meant that the little girl was around. I've had several guests come to the front desk and tell me that there's a little girl crying and they see her and they look up at them. They feel like the little girl is looking right through them during the shutdown at Disneyland Hotel during the COVID. There was several security guards that were watching the hotel, and when we came back, security guards were very happy that we were back because they actually saw the little girl and they actually did show me a picture of her and it was kind of weird. So I worked graveyard shift for 7 years, and there was different things that would happen at the front desk in the lobby. We have cameras or TV sets that have cameras in the lobby, and since the crew was small, and some people had to go to lunch and some people had to take their breaks, you would watch the cameras, and there's a dark figure at the end of the lobby by the second big pole, and it stands there. And the cast members would think that there's somebody out there, so they would say, "Oh, hold on, I think there's somebody out there." They would go out there and then come back. There would be nobody there. I actually saw the figure. It was actually walking towards me. I turned towards the figure and it kind of dissipated into the air. Another story, there was a cast member. He was elderly. He wasn't there. He was off. I didn't know why he was off, and off of work. And I was downstairs in the tunnel, and I saw him. And I saw him walking away from me, and I called out his name, but I tried to walk fast to catch up with him because I hadn't seen him for a while, and he wasn't turning around when I was calling out his name. So I made the turn to the left, and he continued going out towards the tunnel exit, and I just chalked it up as, he just didn't hear me because, maybe he had a hearing problem or something. I went back up to the front desk and I said, "Hey, did you guys see, the cast member? I haven't seen him for a while, but I saw him downstairs." And one of the leads said, "No, you didn't." And I said, "Yes, I did. I just saw him downstairs." The lead said, "You did not see him because he's actually on the operating table right now because he was having his 3rd heart bypass." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yes, he's on the operating table." And he showed me a text from the family, and that, I guess, moment, he actually did pass away. And it was kind of sad because he was really friendly. He was really cool. And we missed him. He just passed away at the same time. And that lead came back to me and he said, "You know what? I never believed in ghosts until you said that you saw him and you explained what he was wearing." And he thought that was kind of weird that I saw him. So, yeah, there you go. Several different other things happened, but many, many stories.
I hired into Disneyland as a cast member in the fall of 2009, and I was a busboy working at the riverfront restaurants. That included Riverbell Terrace, Stage Door Cafe, Bengal Barbecue in Adventureland, and of course, the Golden Horseshoe Saloon back in Frontierland. No one told me Disneyland was haunted, and back then it wasn't a well-known thing on the internet. There weren't tons of YouTube videos about it back then.
Yeah, that's what I did. I was a busboy. I cleaned tables, took trays out, took out trash, things like that. One night, my lead tells me to gather all the Fantasyland food trays that had somehow migrated throughout the day towards our area and take them back to Fantasyland. Now, back then, this is before Galaxy's Edge was there, so I took Big Thunder Trail to get around Big Thunder Mountain. Back then, there was nothing there but Big Thunder Ranch. So there was nothing but trees and natural looking features, and late at night they shut off the lights. So I'm out there with a flashlight and I'm walking down the trail and I feel like someone's following me, and I'm like, that is so weird. And I looking around with the flashlight, it's pitch black, and they don't turn off the sound, so you can hear coyotes and owls and things like that. Naturally, it's a scary feeling. But I feel a tap on my shoulder, like 3 taps or 4 taps or something like that. And I was like, I turned around real quick, and there was nobody there. And it was so insane. The walkway is wide open, so I looked around with my flashlight. There was no one there, and I was never followed or anything by anybody. No one came out and said, "Ha, Alex, you fell for it." So it was just really strange. That was the first time I really thought, like, this place is really freaky because the park is really old. Another weird thing that happened was there is a tunnel underneath Tomorrowland. It does not connect very far. It goes underneath the Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters ride, underneath the Tomorrowland stage, underneath the Carousel Theater, and opens back up on the other side so cast members can exit the park. Anyway, I decided to use that tunnel, and I go down in the tunnel, and immediately when you go down there, it is cold, and you feel like you are not wanted there. And I don't know how to describe that feeling other than exactly how to say it. It feels like you are not wanted. And I was just like, this is a creepy feeling. And I'm like walking down the thing, and I'm trying to get ready to go home. And I feel a cold hand grab my arm, and it pulled my arm a little bit, and I freaked out, and I held up my hands, and I was looking around, and again, nobody there. These experiences that I've had at Disney never convinced me that there were ghosts, because, it could have been my imagination, right? Anybody would think that. But when I started getting shifts at the Golden Horseshoe, that's when I started believing in ghosts, and I'll tell you why. The Golden Horseshoe, from my experience, is the most haunted place at the Disneyland Resort. Probably next to Disneyland Hotel. Disneyland Hotel is pretty haunted, but Golden Horseshoe is probably, you see way more activity there. And to this day, I am pretty confident in saying if you speak to a Golden Horseshoe cast member today, they are likely to tell you either A, that they have heard of the hauntings, or B, that they have experienced the hauntings. That's how haunted it is there. So, for instance, they have these mirrors around the bottom level of the restaurant. And oftentimes when I'd be there, working, even in the middle of the day when there's guests there, I would feel that feeling of someone behind you watching, and I'd look over, and then there would be a person in the mirror staring back at me. And it was a creepy feeling. I'd look around to see if there was someone near me who was looking through the mirror back at me. But people were minding their own business, eating, doing whatever. And I didn't pay it much mind until I started working closing shifts at the restaurant. And I was never told at this point. I was still very new. This was like 2009. I was still very new. And no one had told me that the restaurant was haunted yet. And it's not something you usually just spout out. It makes you look like a crazy person. But I did notice some weird things. So let me talk a little bit about the blonde girl. So in my daytime shifts, between shows, you would see the curtains on the stage rustling. And sometimes it would be the actors who are between shows and stuff, but a lot of times when they were between shows, they would leave the building. They would go on their breaks, they would hang out, they would call family members on their phone. They usually don't hang out on the stage, and the technicians don't either. The technicians are usually busy. They go to another show somewhere else in the park and work that. So I go up to the stage because, well, several times this has happened. This isn't just one time. Guests would sometimes say that they see a little girl on the stage just running around. And so they'd say, oh, there's a little girl on the stage, like, maybe you should find her parents or, something. And I'm like, okay, there shouldn't be any people on the stage. So I'd go up on the stage, I'd go back behind the curtain, and there'd be no one there. the room is big and open back there, so it's easy to look around and just know that there's no one there. And that would happen a few times, but one time in particular, someone had complained of a little child running up on stage. And to be fair, once in a while there are kids that run on stage and you have to get them off the stage, right? But this one particular time, I saw the curtains rustling, and I'm like, oh, great, there are kids down there. And then someone, as I was walking up there, and they're like, oh, are you going to go find that kid? I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, I'll find them, I'll find their parents and stuff. So I go up on stage, I go behind the curtain, and I hear giggling, and I hear pitter-patter of, like, feet running across the stage, and I'm like, oh, there's a kid. So I'm like, hello, I'm like, hey, little kid, you can't be back here, And I don't hear a response, and I look around, and I'm like, but wait, there's no one here. And then I hear the feet again running across the stage in front of me, but there's no one there. And I see the curtains suddenly rustle, just move all of a sudden, as if they had gone past one of them. And I go and I peek around the other side of the curtain, no one there. But I swear to you, the room is wide open back there. There was nowhere for them to hide. But oftentimes I would hear people say that there was a blonde girl who would walk up to their family and try to talk to them, but she'd be like really strange, like she wouldn't respond to answers very much, or questions and things like that. Very basically zoning out. And there was a lot of reports of that at my time working there, and it was really weird. But she was known to hang out on stage during the day. So one night I'm working a closing shift with a coworker, and the restaurant is maybe half an hour from closing. And this family goes to get their food. It's like a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 kids. They go and get their food, and they come up to the second level. There's a second level in the restaurant, for those who don't know. And they sit at one of the tables, and they're all eating. Me and my coworker are standing in the corner, and there's nothing to do, so we're just talking to each other. And we happen to get on the subject of the ghosts, because there's more than one ghost there. And I'll get to that in a minute. But we were on the subject of the little blonde girl. And in fact, it was kind of funny because the family was sitting with a little blonde girl, and she kept turning around, like looking, and she was listening into what we were saying. And I kind of knew, and I was like, oh, we should probably quiet down, like we don't want to like scare anybody. But anyway, so we're talking about the ghosts, and then the little girl from the table, she gets up and walks over to us. And she goes, is this place haunted? And so me and my coworker were like, no, honey, why would you think it's haunted? And she goes, because I think I just saw a ghost. And we just like looked at each other, like, oh, and my coworker tried to comfort her, and the girl ended up walking back to her table. And so me and my coworker were like, well, that's really weird, but maybe the little girl overheard us talking and she just thinks she saw something or whatever. So later that night, it's getting close to midnight. The restaurant's getting ready to close. The guests are leaving. They're filing out. And me and my coworker are gathering trash. The last people to leave is the family of 4 from upstairs. And they're walking out, the 2 parents and their son. And so my coworker is standing with me, and I'm like, oh, where's your little girl? And the 2 adults, they turn around. They're like, little girl? We're like, yeah, didn't you have a daughter with you? She was sitting with you guys. And they looked at each other like, we don't have a daughter. We just came here with our son. And so we're just like, oh. And we're like, oh, okay, well, our mistake, and, see you later. And so the parents walked out, and we shut the door. And I looked at my coworker, and she looked at me, and she's just like, oh my God. And so we go looking around the restaurant. We don't see the little girl. And so that was we both agreed that we had seen a ghost, because the little girl that we saw was with the family the whole time. Granted, we never saw her interact with the family, but she was sitting with them. And the little girl was so real, you wouldn't question it. And she was a little blonde girl with like this light blue like dress, kind of fluffy. She kind of looked like Alice from Alice in Wonderland, like the cartoon. It was kind of funny, but it was freaky because you expect ghosts to be like shadow figures or things in the corner of your eye, but my coworker and I, we came to the conclusion that there was no explanation for that. The little girl was hanging out with that family the whole night. The little girl did not leave prior to the family leaving, nor did she leave after the family leaving. She was gone, and the family that was sitting with her said that they didn't have a daughter. So that was really weird. And I don't have an explanation for that. And that's the little blonde girl. And there's lots of things. People will say that they've seen her running around the top of the Golden Horseshoe, just wandering around. And there's lots of reports of that. But the next ghost of the Golden Horseshoe, besides the ghosts in the mirrors, because believe me, at night, a lot of times I'd be there by myself closing up, and you have to stack the chairs. You stack the chairs in such a way that they interlock together so they don't fall apart and stuff like that. You stack them on the top of the tables so you can mop and sweep underneath them, and then the person in the morning comes and takes the chairs down. Well, anyway, if you're down below on the bottom level, while you're doing all that, sometimes you look through the mirrors and there's people there. I kid you not. The restaurant will be closed. There's no one else there. The cashiers and the leads have gone out to cash to count out their registers in a different building, and there'd be people in the mirrors. And my coworkers would tell me all the time. They'd be like, "I see people in the mirrors." But there's one more ghost there that I was trying to get to. And a lot of people laugh because of the name we gave him. I don't know if the name still goes, but we called him Freddy. The tale goes that Frederick was a elderly third shift cast member who, like a lot of third shift cast members, they'd work in the middle of the night, wash down the walkways, report things that need to be fixed, stuff like that, usual things. But he took his breaks and lunches in a storage closet on the second floor of the Golden Horseshoe. Now, if you look at Stage Door Cafe, which is outside the Golden Horseshoe, it has an upper level where there's 3 French doors that open up onto a patio. But next to that, on the second level, is a small windowless room. There's no windows, and it's just stucco on the outside, and that's at the exit of Stage Door Cafe, so it's up there. That is Freddy's room, and it's only accessible from Golden Horseshoe on the second level. When you go inside Golden Horseshoe, stay to your right and you go up the stairs. On the right hand side is a door. That door leads into a audio room that controls the audio for the walkways in Frontierland. But if you go through a small doorway, that will take you to the first of 2 storage rooms. That storage room is the one with the 3 French doors that open up onto a patio. That's where they store cups and things like that for the restaurants, and napkins and plates and other such things. That room is not necessarily haunted. It's the room beyond it that has no windows, and that is a tiny little room. It's only got a 5-foot clearance for the roof. It's a A-frame roof, and there's barely enough clearance for your head to fit through. And the door for it is tiny. It is like 4.5 feet tall. When I was there were personal items there. There was I don't know if they were props for the stage, maybe they were, but there were like little furniture pieces. There was a brush on a little nightstand, and then there were some boxes where they kept extra storage stuff that they couldn't fit in the room prior. But that windowless room is called Freddy's room. That is where Frederick used to take naps on his lunch breaks. And supposedly one night when he was taking his lunch break, he had a heart attack in his sleep and he died in that room. That is the legend. I've never been able to confirm whether it's true or not, but I can tell you, Freddy's room is most certainly haunted. Several times I've been sent up to the storage room to get things from there, and I'd look over and Freddy's room door would suddenly open. And other times you'd hear banging from the other side of the door. I remember one time I heard the banging and I thought someone was locked in there. I opened the door and there's nobody in there. Now, keep in mind that the door can't lock because that particular door doesn't have a lock on it. It has a door knob so you can push and pull it open, but there's no latch or anything. I think they removed it a long time ago because people actually do get locked in that room for no reason. I knew a cast member who she went into that room late one night. We were all, a bunch of the leads and myself, we were getting ready to leave for the night, and she had to bring out something from Freddy's room downstairs so the other cast members had access to it in the morning. Let me just say, we were waiting a long time for her to come down. Finally, one of my coworkers was like, I'm gonna go find her because, she's taking a while. Next thing I know, the coworker comes down with my other coworker, the one who was missing. She has scratches on her face, and the other lead is, has her arm around her shoulder, and she's like, it'll be okay, or, you're all right. And from what we were told, the cast member ended up being seen by a nurse because she was pretty freaked out. So the other lead came back to us, and what she explained was that the cast member had gone up there, and she went to go inside, grab the box, the door shut behind her really fast, and she could not get it open. She kept pulling and pulling at it, and she thought someone was on the other side of the door keeping the door shut, because she would pull the door apparently and it would have some give to it, but then it would quickly shut again. And she thought someone was playing a trick on her, and she was pounding on the door, and she was screaming for someone to let her out, and that it wasn't funny and that kind of thing. And she was in there for a good 10 minutes or so. Finally, the door had opened, and it just opened on its own, and there was no one there. But the other cast member had just walked down into the room at that time, saw her, and was like, are you okay? Because the other girl was obviously very much in distress. So we were not allowed to be in there by ourselves anymore after that situation. But that wasn't the only time cast members would get locked in there. I heard a year later of 2 more cast members who went up there. They went as a pair, but one of them went into Freddy's room to grab something, and the door had shut behind them and once again locked them in. The other cast member had to shove the door to get it to open. But that's not it. So Freddy stays in Freddy's room throughout the daytime, usually. It isn't till after the restaurant closes that Freddy will come out of the room. And the way to kind of explain that, after Golden Horseshoe closes down and all the guests have left, it still feels like a relatively calm, quiet place. The Frontierland music is still playing lightly in the background. But then you'll hear noises upstairs, and all of a sudden the atmosphere in the room gets really heavy. Really, really, really heavy. Like you have a weight on your shoulders and there's something pressing on your chest. And that's when you know Freddy is no longer in the room. And at first I didn't believe this stuff, but you could feel it. And I remember I was just like, this is really weird. And I would hear the door to the audio room, which is again 2 rooms away from Freddy's room, but is the last barrier between you and Freddy for the night. And you would hear the door pounding like someone's on the other side. I'd open it and there's no one there. But I remember one particular night, I just really felt the atmosphere was really heavy. And I was stacking chairs upstairs, and the leads and the cashiers had gone away to the other building to cash out their registers. And I was stacking chairs, and I remember hearing the pounding on the door, and I went to check and see if someone was there. Again, no one was there. I shut the door, and finally I said out loud, I'm like, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe that Freddy is real. I think that there is someone here playing tricks on me. Next thing I know, the table of chairs I had just stacked got flung off the balcony. Not fell, tipped over, flung. It landed in the center of the restaurant on the level below. It would have taken a great force to push those 4 chairs stacked in a pile to fall that far. And after that, I never questioned whether the place was haunted. And in fact, I came to treat the restaurant with a lot of respect, and the nicer I was about making sure it was clean and pristine, the less ghost activity I would see there. And if I fumbled and I was lazy and I was trying to get out of work quickly, I would see something. I would see something really freaky there. So yeah, and a lot of cast members, especially in my time, would admit they've seen stuff at the Golden Horseshoe. There was no question in most people's minds that they heard the stories or have seen stuff. There was one cast member who said she worked there for years and never saw a ghost. And I said, well, come on, you must have seen something weird happen. And she goes, I never saw a ghost. And she goes, but there are weird things that happen that I can't explain. And I said, thank you. I said, that validates how I feel, because even if you don't see something, you experience it. You may not see a ghost, you may not see an apparition, but you experience something weird. And I was working there, cleaning up for the night. I hadn't yet stacked the chairs upstairs, but I was cleaning up under the tables, sweeping, mopping. And I felt like I was being watched. And once you feel that feeling, you know something's up. And at first I thought it was Freddy, and I thought, oh geez, like, this is gonna be a really creepy night if this is Freddy. But it wasn't, I didn't feel that heaviness that you feel when Freddy's around. Instead, it was just someone watching. And I remember I had finished stacking everything. I was just so ready to leave because I was like, this is such a weird feeling, just feeling watched and not knowing if it was the little girl or the mirrors or Freddy or something. But as I was walking over to the front of the stage, there's these 2 booths on either side of the stage. There's one on the right, one on the left. And those are known as Walt and Roy's booth. Supposedly, according to the story, when Walt Disney would stay at the Golden Horseshoe to watch a show on stage, he'd stay at his booth, which is on the right-hand side of the stage. And his brother Roy, if he was there, he would stay on the left-hand side of the stage. And if they were there together, then you get the idea. That's why they were called Walt and Roy's booth. And I saw, when I looked on the right-hand side at Walt's booth, the chairs were not stacked. And I was like, oh, geez, how did I forget that? So I go up there. I go up into Walt's booth, and one of the chairs is actually pulled up against the railing, as if it's sitting against the railing looking out towards the restaurant where I was. I stack the chairs, and then I go back down the thing, and I hear this rustling behind me. And I was like, that's weird. I look, and I thought maybe the chairs, one of the tables with chairs had shifted or something with its own weight. And so I walk over, and I notice in Walt's booth, the chairs are not in the same position. They are not stacked the exact same way. I go up to the booth, and once again, the chair is up against the railing looking out onto the restaurant. And I don't know, but that was really weird. But there is, actually, come to think that there is one more thing I want to tell you. So if you work an early morning shift, if you get to the Golden Horseshoe at like 7:30 in the morning, sometimes even 8 in the morning, you will smell cigar smoke in there. And even leads have told me that they would come in early in the morning to set the place up, and it would smell just fine. But as they're working, as they're setting things up, it would start to smell like cigar smoke. Beautiful cigar smoke. Well, I found out through some research over the years that Walt Disney, if he was staying in the park, he would have his breakfast at Carnation Cafe on Main Street, then he would walk over to the Golden Horseshoe and smoke a cigar just before the park would open, and then he would go out to the rivers of America and look out onto the river as the park started to become flooded with guests. Anyway, I don't know how to explain these events, but after all this time, I still find them interesting. I still find them interesting to reflect on. But anyway, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a happy Halloween. I thought it was perfectly appropriate to mention these ghost stories just in time for Halloween. So thank you all for joining me, and I hope you all have a magical day. Bye-bye.